To be playing Sega Genesis with bros. Now I'm gaming with some folks on the other side the globe. Used to go through a label if you trying to blow. Now people got more.
Welcome everyone to 3 Count Commentaries. I am MagMongoSlade. Today we're going to talk about this story that came out via TikTok, Instagram, wrestling influencer who is relaying to us that a Luna Vachon documentary has accused Roddy Piper of raping Luna Vachon. So we're going to talk about that today. And I'm just going to play his audio up to a point, and then we're going to discuss what's being heard in said audio.
But like, I've never heard this before, and I've tried going to the internet to find it, and I can't find it anywhere. So maybe it is, or maybe I'm out of the loop. So for those of you who don't know, I went to Fantastic Fest last weekend, and I saw like 15 different movies. And among those 15, I watched the documentary, Lunatic, A Luna Vachon Story, which was a very good documentary that highlights the life and times of Luna Vachon. I never watched her Dark Side of the Ring, nor many Dark Side of the Ring episodes, so this was kind of my first exposure to her trials and tribulations that she went through life, her time in WWE, all the sorts. But one thing that truly stands out in this documentary, and will stand out to many in this documentary, is the accusation of a very well-known wrestler that I want to talk about right now, because I'm still trying to process it. So towards the end of the documentary, and I want to be as correct about this as possible, I don't recall if it was Luna Vachon's voice herself saying this, or if it was someone else voicing it for her, like speaking for her, because she's obviously been passed for like 10 years now. But the voice basically echoed that Roddy Piper, or Luna Vachon, between the ages of 12 and 13 years old. And I was floored. And I think everyone in the theater was floored when they heard this. And it was very brief. It wasn't really touched upon much longer than the time I took to really tell you that. And, part of that whole discourse was about how, many boys in the back at that time, they couldn't be trusted. The women in the locker room were treated like garbage. You just couldn't trust people in the industry. And it was just very disheartening to hear about this. And ever since the Me Too movement in 2020, we have seen so many different brave individuals come out about their stories, about their interactions with professional wrestlers. It's always sad to hear, and it always hurts when it's a wrestler that you knew or watched, but it hurts a little bit more when it's a wrestler that you grew up watching or idolizing. And Roddy Piper is considered a legend to many. And the director I spoke to afterwards, she basically cleared up to me that she wasn't entirely sure if she wanted to put this in the documentary because, she feels like it wasn't really her place to say. But ultimately, she came to the conclusion that, if Luna Vachon told this person and this person is putting that story out, then this is part of Luna Vachon's story, and it is her duty to get her story out there. So that is why she included it in the documentary, because she also said there was 5 hours of this film that she had to cut out, but this was a piece she was not willing to cut out. And I have tremendous respect for her for doing that. But for now.
All right. So for starters, you should not have tremendous respect for anybody who is gossiping about dead people. All right. So let's just put that out there right up front. You, as a storyteller, you're relaying information. If you present something as factual without being able to prove it, that is actionable. I hope that the family of Roddy Piper, upon the release, the worldwide release of this documentary, sues the director. I hope so. Look at how reckless people get when you're talking about men. The idea that they cannot prove it, they decide we're just going to throw it in there anyway, even though we can't vet that information. Roddy Piper's been dead for 10 years. Luna Vachon's been dead for 15 years. But we're going to throw it out there anyway. And who the hell cares if it ruins Roddy Piper's name and his legacy? Who cares if it deeply affects his fandom? Who cares? We're telling a story here. This is part of her story. Think about that for a second. And they say, well, we didn't really go into any details. You don't throw this kind of stuff on people's name. You're calling the guy a rapist. This is a pretty fucking big deal. But people get real loose when you're talking about accusing men of crimes. Now, because we don't know whether this happened or not, none of us were there, likely. I decided to go and look, and I did some mild research, not a whole hell of a lot. But I went to Pat Laprade. His name is Patrick Laprade. He is a Canadian wrestling historian. He wrote the book on Andre the Giant. He wrote at least 2 books on the Vachon family. He does tons of interviews about Canadian territorial wrestling. And he wrote a book called Mad Dogs, Midgets, and Screwjobs, if I remember correctly. And in that book, he tells the story that the Vachon family, which Luna is a part of, she is the adopted daughter of Paul the Butcher Vachon. They started a wrestling company in 1974 called Celebrity Wrestling. Well, they started this promotion in 1974. In April of 1974, who comes to town but Roddy Piper? He works for them in April of 1974. So this would have put Roddy Piper and the Vachons in Montreal together when Luna had already turned 12. She turned 12 in 1974. She was born in 1962. Roddy Piper was born in 1954, so he'd have been either 19 or 20, depending on what the date of that event was, because Piper was born in April of 1954. So if it was before or after his birthday, he'd have been 19 or he would have been 20. So if you say, well, this thing kind of occurred, then this was prime real estate about when it would have occurred. Okay? So this is just me looking to see when would they have been in the same place at the same time, with Luna being so young, in fact, too young to travel. And this is the only place I could have thought where it would have made sense for them to be in the same place at the same time. Piper had a significant relationship to the family. He actually considered Mad Dog Vachon, who was Luna's uncle, a father figure to him. And he was very upset when Mad Dog Vachon passed away. Obviously, they worked together in the WWF years later, which would have been awkward if he'd have raped her when she was 12. Been very bizarre to show up to work and Roddy Piper is there. As a matter of fact, it would have been very fucking weird because Roddy Piper would have been there since 1983 or 1984 or something like that, and she'd have been just coming in like 1990, 1991 or thereabouts. Luna started training at 16 years old. She trained with the Fabulous Moolah. So, she started wrestling kind of early, but not that early. It would have taken us outside of the realm of when she would have been traveling on her own. If it happened between the ages of 12 and 13, then it would have happened in either 1974 or 1975. Celebrity Wrestling actually lost its TV slot, according to Pat Laprade, in 1975. So the promotion didn't even last a full year. Even though there might be some nuance to that, I think there might have been a couple of different promotions, like they changed the name of it or whatever. But it was written in the books. Roddy Piper was there in Montreal in 1974. So if it happened around this time. And Roddy Piper was a friend of the family anyway. He was pretty close to the family. So if you're one of these people who say, well, I wouldn't put it past them, it probably did happen, this is the evidence that you could point to and say, hey, well, they did kind of cross paths. They would have had to. Right? Even with this, and I looked this up on my own, even with this, I still say You don't play with the man's name unless you're certain. Okay? Don't play with people's names and legacies unless you are certain. And to me, it comes across like this likely feminist director did not see that Roddy Piper's legacy was of any value. That it was all about Luna and telling Luna's story, which is fine. Luna rules. I'm fine with you telling Luna's story. But, and I've seen other reviews of the documentary where they actually made his uncle, her uncle look bad. Because I looked it up, like once I started seeing all of this stuff, I'm like, wait, what the hell? What the hell else is in this documentary? And I believe it was her uncle. Let me see if I can find that clip. No, it wasn't her. It wasn't her uncle. It was her father, actually. Paul the Butcher Vachon, her adopted father, who says that this is from a Substack from an individual who also saw the documentary. And it says, and I quote, Vachon's old father, since deceased, says on camera that women don't belong in wrestling because it turns them into lesbians. That's what kind of documentary we got here, is a feminist piece that's looking to paint Luna as a victim, as a woman in the business back in the halcyon days of the 70s and 80s and such. Even though it would have been the 80s for her, that's when she got started. Obviously, she was trained by the fabulous Moolah, and that's an entire bad circumstance. We know Moolah's reputation is not very good. So it's entirely possible that bad shit happened. Okay. Now, on the Piper allegations, this Substack account, which is Steven Silver, he just says that there were some unsettling things said about Roddy Piper. He didn't go into any details about the issue. So it just says, quote, the film also alleges some not so pleasant stuff about the late Roddy Piper. So he didn't go into any detail about Roddy Piper and Luna Vachon or anything like that. And that was the only other review I've seen about this in bothering to look it up. To me, this comes across a lot like, I don't know if you guys probably remember this. When WWE did their slate of biographies, they did the biography of Randy the Macho Man Savage. And in it, they had his ex-girlfriend, Gorgeous George, who was talking about all this crazy, how crazy Randy was. You know, how he was recording them and he would never let them leave, and, you know, making them sound super paranoid and nutty. And then after the documentary was over, everybody was like, WWE put out a hit job on Randy Savage. They let Gorgeous George say whatever she wanted. And then the next slate of documentaries that came out afterward were pristine. Okay? They cleaned them shits right on up because they realized you can't be lackadaisical and reckless with these people's names. You can't do that. You know, you can't have these rogue directors out here. Look, you want to, at least in that situation, we can confirm that Gorgeous George is telling a story from her perspective as the person who met him, who was in a relationship with him. She's trying to tell her side of the relationship of her and Randy Savage. Okay. So you can criticize the director for putting it in there and leaving it in there, but this is what she wanted to put out there as a person who knew him. We as fans did not know him. We as fans are offended that they would put that in there, but the director don't know what's true or what's not true. And it's the person who is not somebody who heard something, somebody who claimed they experienced something. They put it in there. And he felt like he had to keep it because, well, Gorgeous George is an eyewitness to this thing occurring, allegedly. Now, when it comes to this Luna Vachon story, we're not sure, and this is great marketing for the documentary, right? Whether it's Luna herself saying it, or whether it's somebody relating a story that Luna allegedly told them. If it's gossip, it needs to be on the cutting room floor. I hope that this, because now it's everywhere. Now it's all over Reddit and everywhere, right? If this is released, this documentary is released for mass consumption with that still in there, I really hope Roddy Piper's family sues these people. I really do. One way or the other. Don't let it sit, because then people are going to say, well, why didn't they sue? Why didn't they do anything? Why didn't they force them to edit it out? I absolutely would sue them. If it was my father, if it was my uncle, if it was my husband, I would sue them. All right? These people have to start, they have to learn. You cannot be reckless with my family's names. They are too reckless, too loose with the names of these men. They do too much. They do too much. But let me know what you guys think. I gave you all the information I had. And I've presented the story as it was presented to us. We weren't there, so we don't know. I have righteous indignation, obviously, as a fan of both parties, Roddy Piper and Luna Vachon. Rest in peace to them both. But obviously, we can't talk about Roddy Piper the same if there's evidence of this. But likely there will be none. So, like, share, subscribe. I'll talk to you guys later, man. Peace out.
Old non-aggression. Once that lesson sets in, you'll see a session. But you got an affection for no progression, regression. The best don't